Rise, renew, reconnect. Welcome to From the Ashes, a podcast where every story ignites hope and healing.
And the fire in the darkest night, the phoenix burns. It's ready for flight. Shadows may come, try to tear you apart, but you're the flame that ignites.
All right, so today my guest is Michael Green, and we were both students at the Southern California University of Health Sciences as Ayurveda students. And so today Michael is tuning in from Bali, and I am really happy to have you here. So welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Valerie. It's great to be here.
Amazing. So we have a lot to dig into, and I know, aside from being an Ayurvedic practitioner, you're also a meditation teacher, and you've been doing that for quite some time. I always like to start out by asking my guests their From the Ashes story. So a From the Ashes story is a story of a time in your life where you feel like you have had to reinvent yourself, start over, rebirthing from the ashes moment. But since you are a meditation teacher, and I know that you did a Vipassana retreat in 2007, right? I'd like to angle that question a little bit and also ask you what inspired that first meditation retreat, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so I guess the inner sadist in me keeps going back to Vipassana because I just completed another Vipassana about a month ago. So, but it was that first one in 2007 that really revolutionized my life. Like, I was in India and I was just traveling around. I was there for 9 months and I think I spent like a few $1,000s. I was just backpacking around India, and I was interested in meditation at the time, but meditation to me was just listening to chilled out music and like smoking a cigarette in my bed. It wasn't like any sort of hardcore dharma practice, or I didn't even know what dharma was. And a friend of mine recommended the Vipassana. And had I known what I was getting into, I never would have gone because it was so old school and very difficult. But it ultimately changed my life and revolutionized me as a person. It made me understand, or helped me understand, that everything in our body, emotions, thoughts, sensations, it's really just data at the end of the day. Like, we are always in choice on how to respond to this data, and Vipassana teaches you just that little extra second, right, between stimulus and response can make all the difference. There's a great quote by Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor, and I don't know if he was a meditator, but he has the best quote about meditation. He says, between stimulus and response, there is space, and in that space there is choice, and in that choice lay our freedom. So in that retreat, as like a dumb American, I couldn't sit still on a cushion for 30 seconds. And I was in so much pain. I had knee pain, back pain, mental pain, like, what am I doing here? These people are insane. How did I end up in this crazy situation? And it's through that technique, just observing pain as like raw data, and just dropping the story about, my running injury, my lower back pain or whatever, and just observing it. It just totally changed my life. And then, 30 seconds on the cushion turned into 60 seconds into a couple minutes. And by the end of the retreat, I could sit for 15 minutes or something. And now it's just like home base for me, sitting in that, meditation position. It's just so natural. And I forget that, I started at like such a basic level. But having said that, that's like a nice preamble to the Ayurveda and like the From the Ashes thing, because, meditation, that was 17 years ago now. And it really, I've had my practice has sort of vacillated between like the Vipassana, the Theravadan stuff. And lately it's been more Tibetan lineage. But that's always been a through line for me through my spiritual practice. And it's been an absolutely essential guide for me. But Ayurveda, for the past, I'll be 45 and next month. So I guess since I was 22, for almost 20 years, I wanted to be a novelist. I wrote a couple novels, and when I got to LA, it was pilots and stuff like that, and lots of short stories. And so for 20 years, I wrote books, and I wrote, and I supported myself by waiting tables in the evening, both
Mhm.
in New York City, where I spent 13 years, and LA, where I was there for about 6 years. And it just, for 20 years, it really felt like I was like Sisyphus, like just pushing a boulder up a hill.
Mhm.
And it was just not happening for me. And as I got older and I continued to write, and then as I hit 40 and I'm still waiting tables and I don't have an agent, and my books are just dying on my desktop, and I'm getting more and more into meditation. I'm getting more and more into natural health and biohacking and all of this stuff. And I'm waking up early, and then getting off at work at 2 a.m. It's not really conducive to the circadian rhythms, and a healthy lifestyle. So it was a hard, like when COVID happened in March 2020, I was so burnt out, and I was so like not in a good place. I was like, what am I doing? Like, I'm 40 years old. I'm still waiting tables. I'm still like writing. When COVID happened, it was like, okay, just give me 2 weeks. Just give me 2 weeks off. I just want to have 2 weeks and just like, away from the restaurant. And then when two turned into four, and then, it turned into a couple months. I remember I was in Florida, and I was driving my mom to work, and because my parents live in Florida, and I would leave LA and I'd go back and visit. And she was like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. It's like even that survival job, wasn't happening because of the pandemic. And she's like, why don't you go back to school? And she's like, there's got to be something that you want to do. And I was like, well, there is actually. And I was like, there's Ayurveda. And she's like, what's that? And I was
Mhm.
like, I don't know. I don't know what it is. 'Cause I knew intuitively what it is, being, I haven't spent a year in India and studying meditation, being into yoga, and like I was kind of just circling Ayurveda without really realizing it, and being into natural health. So at 40 years old, I went back to school, and it was like very humbling, to say the least, and to start over. And I would say the meditation practice was absolutely vital and indispensable and essential to actually navigate like that phase of my life with, like a semblance of like, confidence, and like self-acceptance. But even like during that first year, it was still like, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm just learning about this thing. It's like, what am I doing? And then like about a year, it took about at least a year, maybe into the second year, where Ayurveda like really clicked for me, where it's like my lifestyle, like my health started to change,
Mm.
and it started to change me. And then it was like, okay, this is a path, you know? And then there was a moment, and I remember it very specifically. It was probably towards the end of the second year, about
Mhm.
maybe a year and a half or maybe a year and three quarters into the journey. And I'm talking to my friend on the phone. I'm walking around the Silver Lake Reservoir, right? And I remember like where I was, and my friend's a writer as well, and I'm just talking about this whole journey, this whole health journey, and it just kind of came out of my mouth like without even really thinking about it. And I was talking about writing. I was like, I left everything on the table with writing. It's like I tried as hard as I could. I wrote two novels. I wrote uh, a couple pilots. I did all the networking, the agenting, and the emailing and all the business side of it. I was like, I left everything on the table. I worked as hard as I could. I was as creative as possible. I was very disciplined. And you know what? Didn't work out. And it was just like such a clean feeling of like, all right, I'm done.
Mm.
Like, I'm like segueing into something new. And it was surprising, it's like, that sunken cost fallacy, where it's like you sink 20 years into something, And then there's that bulldog in me that's like, okay, I'm not letting go of this. I've just invested too much. But it was like, you know what? I can walk away with a clean conscience, knowing that I gave it all I could.
Mhm.
And then when we finished school, a few months later, there was a moment I was in the Sequoias. I went on this like solo camping trip in the Sequoias, and like I brought my journal, I like brought a beer, I cracked open a beer and I'm sitting there at the picnic table in this like incredible environment. And I had this sort of like download. I had been on the illusion, it's like, I had chosen to study Ayurveda, but I had this like download where it was like, those claw crane machines where you like plunk a quarter in and then
Yep.
the claw like kind of comes and grabs a teddy bear whose face is like against the glass. And like, if you're lucky, it will like pull it out and you get a teddy bear out of it. I had this like distinct feeling that I was just like this teddy bear whose face was like pressed against the glass. And like the long arm of Ayurveda, like the universe has plunked a quarter in. It just kind of like rescued me, it just kind of like plucked me out of this like teddy bear soup and just like took me out and just extracted me. So it was an interesting, like, okay, not that I'm like some special like prodigy or something, but it's like it like felt like it was not an individual decision. It was like a co-creation with like a deeper intelligence. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this thing, and then since then it's been quite a ride, and I've learned so much, just about myself and about other people and just about healing and health in general. And my story, it's just like starting over at such a late age. It's really given me like an understanding and a compassion for people. And it's also, it always used to trip me out. It's like, we are expected at, 21, 22, maybe even younger when we graduate college or high school to, select a career,
Yeah.
which is such a trip. And we're like our brains aren't even formed yet. Like we're just kids. Like, how do we know like what we want to be doing for 40 years? It's just so mind blowing. So, at 22, I decided I wanted to be like the great American novelist. And then when I was at 40, when I hit 40, it was like getting into dharma and Ayurveda and natural health. It's like having my mind blown just reading these texts and getting into the spiritual journey. It's like fiction just didn't hold a candle to that.
Mm.
It's like my satisfaction with fiction was just becoming less and less. And like the books that really inspired me and that I love, it was like once every like few years I'd read one of these books. In my early 20s, it was revelatory and just so insightful and like I loved it. But by the time I hit 40, I was like, this is kind of dumb. It's like I read so much and like so much of it was just mediocre. I'd get so much more out of reading
Mhm.
dharma or Ayurveda or health or spiritual books. My whole interest had changed, everything had changed. And I just am grateful I had the wisdom and also the support to pivot and make a big change at 40. And now it just feels actually for the first time in my life, like my values and my career and my goals are all congruent. And it's a really strange, but also satisfying feeling.
Yeah. I definitely feel you on the starting over and the sunken cost fallacy. I feel like up until a certain point, I still was holding on to that, like, I need to use everything that I've ever learned, and I gotta make it all worth it. Yeah, when you do that, it just, like, you kind of lose yourself too, because it's like you start to live for somebody else, and that can veer you off the path that you're meant to be on.
Absolutely. And then the sunken cost, it's like you're kind of being controlled by like a past self,
Mhm.
It's like your forward momentum is kind of being it's like a lot of inertia is created. It's like you're not leading from a vision, you're leading from some sort of like guilt or obligation.
Yeah.
And it's very subtle. It's yet still it can kind of change the whole trajectory of your career and of your life. It's like just that it's like a clenching energy, like hanging on to something. You think that you've like actually invested, but in reality, it's like every moment is like the Venn diagram of like karma and creativity.
Mhm.
You know, it's like every moment is like a result of past moments, but it's also infinitely creative. So when we're like stuck in the sunken cost fallacy, we're attuned and sort of like buying into the karma aspect of it, where it's just so we're governed by the past, but we're losing sight of the creativity aspect. And it's both things always, like ad infinitum, perpetually. It's karma and creativity. It's destiny and free will. So like when we're stuck in the past and the sunken costs and those investments we've made that we want dividends from, we're overly reliant on the karma and the destiny. And it's I listened to this interview once. It was with, you know, Sri Ravi Shankar, you know him, the Art of Living guy. He said something in his really sweet, like innocent way once. He's like, you know, it's like people really look back at their lives and in the past, and they think that like every like their past is like a result of you know, or their present moment is a result of like bad choices. He's like, and then they look at the future and it's like it's already predetermined, you know. He's like, but you just have to reverse it. The future, it's like all choice, right? You know, it's like, yeah, okay, maybe in the past it's like you made some choices that got you here, but in the future it's all creativity. And just switch your mindset. You know, in Buddhism, it's like, you know, it's the view, you know, it's like the right view is often considered like the first and last spoke of like the Eightfold Path. And that has been so extraordinarily helpful to me. It's like just the view and how you see things or how I see things. It's just this subtle, like, you know, like a slide projector, you're just putting a new slide in your vision. And it's one of the things with Ayurveda that's been so mind blowing. It's like the simplest things often create the greatest dividends and the greatest downstream result. And just changing like my attitude and my perspective on things has made like all the difference, to be honest
Mhm.
with you. And it's actually made me less reliant on like external sources to fix things. Because I know it's like so many solutions are just can just be endogenously creatively generated.
And I think what I'm also hearing as you talk is that there's a lot less fear that's gonna go into your actions now that you do have kind of this center because, when we are trying to make it, so to say, by becoming an author, artist, et cetera, there's always this kind of like worry that it's not gonna work out. But it's like if you don't get this result, everything else was not really meant is goes to waste, and that creates that kind of scarcity mindset. But when you have it so that it's like you're already just doing and embodying what you were meant to do, you're living in alignment with your convictions and your values and kind of like that dharma, then it's like no moment is wasted as long as you're centered in that.
Totally.
And I find like
And
even with fewer resources than you've had in the past, like there's a path that you are like you feel like everything is aligned so it doesn't feel as I don't know, like ripping. Does that make sense?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I've also been like lately, I've just been thinking a lot about like, what does making it even mean? You know, if I had a book published or like I was on, or if I appeared on Joe Rogan or something like that, it's like, what does that mean? Okay, more people would hear me, but then, you know, a week later, the book would just be kind of forgotten about, and the podcast would just disappear into the internet. And then I just like start over again and have to like keep promoting myself. It like never ends. It was like it's like there's never a point where you're like perpetually making it. You know, you're just like solidified in the canon of like greatness. It's like always a constant flow and a constant process. And making it, okay, yeah, there's a certain level of financial stability that everybody aspires to. But even then, it's okay, you may be financially stable for a year or two, but then you have to keep hustling and keep working. So, like, what does making it even mean? It's like, how do you define making it? Is it some sort of like inner value or inner self-worth or inner happiness, or is it some sort of reach? You know, as an educator, as like someone who wants to talk about Ayurveda or self-compassion or whatever, It's like just, getting your message into as many ears as possible. It's like, what does that mean, like to make it? I've just been really kind of pondering what that definition is and what it means to me now. And also like checking in with my intentions. Why am I emailing like this one podcast to appear on somebody's like, this like famous like influencer? Do I just want to appear to be someone, or like do I actually like feel compelled to like share the message? And just like checking in with myself,
Mhm.
it's like what do I want here? It's just so it can get kind of sticky, It's everybody has that sort of, egoic desire. And when your values can be, sort of like your intentions can be aligned or pure, then you can trick yourself, into saying, "Oh, I just want to spread the dharma or the vidya of Ayurveda or something." But so I'm just deeply pondering that lately. It's like, what does that even mean? Because I see so many people hustling and hustling and hustling to get, record the videos and then the podcasts and then the newsletters and, Instagram. And it's like, okay, there's a certain amount of like hustle everyone has to do, but what are we doing? You
Mhm.
know? So I've just been deeply questioning that lately.
Yeah, I appreciate that too because, like, you could get really stuck in other people's what you should be doing and what needs to happen, da 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 da, da, right? There's like this pace to life that it seems to really advocate for you just to like go, go, go without really thinking about like what it is you're actually doing. And like, are you at the end of the day, are you really still centered in yourself if you continue to put so much energy outward and
Mhm.
so much attention outward? I want to ask you a question because you said from 22-ish to 40, right? Is when you were,
Uh-huh.
that's actually a long time to be pursuing something. And, you have to be pretty motivated to keep going. What would you say is the difference between the motivation you had during that time period and the motivation that you feel now?
Great question. Let me just tune into that for a second. I think if I could answer, I think it's more now, it's more service oriented. Like I feel like the congruency I mentioned earlier, it's like the alignment between like being in service to others, and then also being in service to myself.
Mhm.
That's a congruency if I had to like hone in on that for like what that actually meant. But I think like with the fiction, it was more just for me. It's like the writing, it was like, okay, I want to just, be someone or like make it as an author or something. But there wasn't really any sort of service element to that. It was just like me, me, me. I just want to have my name on a book and have a publisher and, be this sort of like, be part of the Brooklyn intelligentsia or something. And it was, and thank God that didn't happen because that just seems so like not my jam anymore. So I think that's the difference. I think it's the service element. And not to say that fiction can't be of service and you can't learn a lot from good books, but it's just, in my opinion, it just kind of pales in comparison to any sort of like, spiritual practice or meditation or lifestyle adjustments and just helping people reduce suffering, and I think that's like one of the, as I got deeper into Buddhism, and I have like a bit of a unique background with Ayurveda because I was already like sort of my like tea bag was already pretty like dharma steeped when I
Mhm.
found Ayurveda. And so like I kind of came into that with a Buddhist background. And a lot of the Buddhism is compassion. It's like compassion for other beings and compassion for self and compassion for other. So it really like informed my Ayurveda practice like big time, and also just informed my life. So I think, to answer your question, without rambling too much, it's definitely the service aspect of the career, where it's like what I'm doing is can actually help people. not to say I help people, every client who comes to see me, I do my best, but it's often has to be a marriage, like a nice marriage between the client and the practitioner. But also, I think, one of my frustrations with fiction was that, like, I would read so many books that are just like totally non-service oriented. They're just like egoic, like vomit, and I just can't. It's just not worth my time anymore to read something like that. I went from reading, dozens of novels a year to maybe reading one or two, which is like sad to say. But I think that's it. It's like, any just talking about books, it's like any meditation book or Ayurveda book or health book or spiritual book, it's all in service. It's all written in service to help people. And with writing, it's just with fiction, it's just not the case. I mean, it can be, and now it's just like a bad habit. I just can't like stop writing. But now I'm writing something that's like it's a little bit different, and coming from that place of service.
Yeah.
So, or so I like to think. I mean, we can easily kid ourselves.
The reason why I asked this question is because I have a similar background as a hip hop artist and really burnt out on that because, it's Hollywood and commercial dance and there's ego everywhere. It really didn't sit well with me. And at the end of the day, I burnt out because it fizzled my passion. And even if I could find small little outlets where I could be of service, people wouldn't really gravitate towards that and I couldn't really survive on that. It was really hard for me to make peace with that. I couldn't really do my art the way that I wanted to. But it's always been a passion. Dance has always been a passion. It's been a self-expression. It's like as long as I can be of service in the way that I want and dance, I'm happy to do it. So now that I know that you're writing again, was writing ever a passion for you? Did it really start as just like, oh, I want to be known as the best writer kind of thing?
Oh, it was definitely a passion for me. I mean, the passion sort of um, waned over the years, but I think a lot of it has to do with um, like, which I guess is just natural. If you start doing something as a passion and then nobody really cares,
Mhm.
then maybe the energy behind that passion starts to wane a little bit. And I think that's what happened. I think it's like once, I mean, not to say that it's entirely dependent on other people's opinions or perspectives, but like if you're an artist in any capacity and you create something and nobody cares, then it's going to diminish your passion a little bit. I mean, that's just the way it is. So I think especially in my 20s, it 100% was like a passion, but then it just, nobody really cared, number one. And number two, it was my interest has started to change because like I started to grow as a person. And so it was like these two parallel tracks that kind of just veered me into a different life altogether. If you asked me, even 5 years ago, I still would have just like say, this is what I want. This is what I'm on this planet to do. And but now it's just like, oh, thank God that didn't happen. Like, thank God, because I would just be, I mean, who knows? I can't say this with any, like, with 100% accuracy, but I'd probably just be like this. I'd still be living in New York or LA, and I'd be like neurotic and like over caffeinated and probably like anxious and, uh, and just like not the person I am. I'm just a different person, like these practices have totally changed me and these deep, deep cultural traditions that go back thousands of years have just totally changed me. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. And just like, ironically, it's like, here I am writing again, but it's from this like different
Mhm.
place. And it's also from like one of joy and excitement and interest. And then it is like some sort of, obligation to get published and start a career and get out of the restaurant. It's just from a different place, like not only my perspective, but my intention. Yeah, it's just been such incredible journey, and it doesn't it's just not going to end ever. It's just going to keep going. So I'm sure if we talk in a few years and be like, "Oh my God, listen," it's just so, it's just mind blowing. It's just to fall in love with the journey, no matter what stage you're at, and just ultimately shift your view of like, okay, well, I'm in 51% of control of like how I respond to things. I mean, that's meditation in a nutshell. It's like, responsibility to to every situation, really, and to taking your mindfulness and your meditation practice off the cushion for 20 minutes a day and just bringing it into daily life. It's like I'm in control of my response to things. So if I'm in control of my response to things, I'm in sort of control all the time. And how I view things is how the world shapeshifts and, appears to me. I have a meditation student I've been working with, for many years. He's a kid, he started in 14, now he's like 18. I tell him it's like, if you walk into a store with a smile on your face, you're going to get a different response from the clerk and everybody than you walk into a store with sunglasses on and like, looking at your shoes. It's just the way the world is. It's like, just to view it with a different perspective, it just changes the way the world shapeshifts and manifests. And how it took me like, 25 or 45 years to learn that, it's just like still a practice, but it's just like these simple metrics of how I try to live my life. That's just, I don't know. It's just like there's been something really liberating that sort of unlocked for me in the past couple of years where it's like, okay, my number one responsibility is to be in complete command and control of my view and my perspective on life. That's like number one. It's
Mhm.
like I do that every morning when I sit down and meditate. And if I'm grumpy, I own the grumpiness. If I'm sleepy, I own the sleepiness. And I just sit with things as they are and I metabolize how I'm feeling, which, you know, isn't always like positive. But then I always try to just lean into that view. It's just like lean into that view and it's like reversing 25 years of cynicism.
Mhm.
It's been a
Mhm.
process, but it's like I feel like, I've got my elbows on the ledge of like the next stage of this video game, whatever it is. And
Mhm.
I find that the most important thing that I can do personally is to just shift my view and my perspective and trust, without getting too woo woo, but just trust. It's just like the way that, it's just the way it is, just to trust. There's a great quote. It's like I think it's a Sufi quote. Trust in God, but tether your camel to the post.
Mhm.
It's like just be practical, but also trust. It's two sides of the same coin. It's like both are absolutely necessary. And I spent so long just like tying the knot of the rope and just tether it, being practical without the trust element. So I
Mhm.
just find it's like such a necessary synergy.
Sometimes I, like, float between the 2, like, sometimes I feel like I'm letting go a lot and just allowing it, without tethering, but tethering is definitely still very important, so that you're responsible for whatever may come, right?
Totally. And
Yeah.
that's like Ayurveda and the seasons, Ayurveda, it's like, no one medicine works for all the time for one person. It's like what if you take ashwagandha and that works for you now in 2 weeks, it may be a completely different ballgame,
Yeah.
you know?
I wanna ask because, there's a lot of directions I could take this conversation, but I do wanna touch upon the Ayurveda and the mental health, since that's what we reconnected on before, and it is really what I'm working on focusing on, and I believe what you are also focusing on. It's kind of where I see a lot of the magic of Ayurveda happening, even though, when we were in school, it wasn't necessarily the main focus. We spent a lot of time thinking about the doshas, of course, and also the herbal medicines and the ways of treatment. But there's this whole side of Ayurveda that the reason why I even got into Ayurveda is because of this psycho-spiritual context that it gives to everything. So I want to know a little bit about how Ayurveda has informed your practice as a practitioner, as a meditation teacher, and yeah, what is your perspective on that?
I have I have a lot to say on that issue, and I find that when I first like started to see clients and whatnot, it's like I would tell people to eat this and don't eat that and take this herb and, stop eating, French fries or something. But as I've developed and grown my practice, I've seen that like most physical problems are downstream of choices that we make, first of all, but also stress and trauma and self-compassion and self-criticism. And there's a great, do you know Buckminster Fuller?
Mhm.
He has a really legendary quote. It's actually on his tombstone. It says, "Call me trim tab." Right? He has this notion of the trim tab because he says that like an ocean liner, for example, is controlled by the rudder. The directionality of the ocean liner is controlled by the rudder, but the rudder is controlled by this like little piece of plastic,
Mm.
right? That kind of like helps the rudder vacillate like back and forth, and which controls the ocean liner. So he says, call me trim tab. He's like, I'm just this little piece of plastic that's like directing the rudder, that's directing the ocean liner. And I find that like the view back to Buddhism and how we see things and how we treat ourselves and our mental health is the trim tab of our whole lives, not only our physical health, but the
Mm.
mental, but like how we interact with the world. And there is an incredible in Ayurveda, the notion of prajna parada, which translates to crimes against wisdom. And this is so instructive and helpful, and I use this with almost all my clients. And crimes against wisdom is like so like the classic example in Robert Svoboda. I think I got this from him, but he says it's like, okay, so let's say you're streaming Netflix, it's late at night, and you go to the freezer, you get some ice cream, and then you just start eating the ice cream, and then you stream a second episode, and you keep eating, and then the next thing you know, it's like you're on like season 10, the ice cream's empty, and then like you wake up in the morning with like a tummy ache, and like you didn't sleep well. And so according to this notion of prajna parada, it's not the ice cream or the television that made you sleep bad and caused you a bellyache.
Mhm.
It's actually the choice that you made bite after bite and episode after episode to keep streaming and to keep eating when you know how this story unfolds. It's like, it's not your first rodeo. Everybody's finished the ice cream before when you know that's not in your best interest to do so. So that would be like the root cause, right? That choice
Yeah.
is the root cause. The choice that we make that is so subtle and imperceptible, bite after bite, to keep eating when we know how we're going to feel in the morning. And that has given me like that choice is meditation, because in meditation, when your mind wanders, you make a choice to return to your breath or to the mantra or whatever it is you're using as an object. That choice, moment by moment, breath by breath, day by day, minute by minute, is everything. And that is like upstream of so many aspects of health, physical health, right? It's those choices that we make. So starting there, like with the trim tab and the prajna parada and the choices, it's like understanding that mechanism and getting clients to understand that mechanism, where it's like less the food choices that we make, but also the quantities that we eat and how we eat it. But it's also like so many other things. It's like that choice, that invisible choice we keep making bite after bite to fill a void within ourselves, and that's like when the self-compassion thing comes in. It's like really like revolutionized my life, and it's revolutionized my practice, where I see so many people who just hate themselves, like,
Mhm.
and they don't even know it, and it's like an illness that I can see in others because I had the same illness and I didn't know that I had it, until it was pointed out to me. And then I realized that I was like, while I was so nice and I was so kind to everyone else, to myself, I was this merciless monster, who had like impossibly high standards.
Mhm.
And until I started to really cultivate that self-compassion practice, and I realized that almost everything I was seeking exogenously, like in the external world, was due to this void of like self-love that I just couldn't generate for myself. And once I started to take up this practice of like providing myself internal validation, I stopped seeking it, or I would say I seek it less and less from the outside world, because I've learned how to forgive myself and have self-compassion for, either poor choices that I've made, or, things that happened to me. And it's just, this is like a daily thing, it's like a daily practice. I mean, for big things in life and small things. So like once I sort of had learned and got wise to providing myself with this like internal, like, hey, it's okay. You did the best you can. You're doing the best you can. It's your intentions are good. Didn't work out, but that's all right, man. It's all good. I love you. I forgive you. It's like that void, that like validation void that so many people feel now. And that's been sort of like just driven to the maximum of insanity by social media and like the world that we live in. It starts to like that need, starts to become less and less.
Mhm.
And I see that and I try to really like when the mental health thing, it's like the self-compassion is so important, like just beyond important. And it's like this invisible disorder that's like largely undiagnosed. And almost something has just gone off the rails in the Western world. And
Mhm.
like, having worked in Thailand and now Bali, it's like, it's not just the US, it's like people from all over the Western world have this. And it's just incredibly pernicious and silent in the way that it kind of catabolizes your ability to just be okay with yourself. I mean, it's just crazy. And so I see a lot of like talk about the mental health and physical health, the relationship. The self-compassion thing is so important. And also that is so applicable when it comes to trauma and stress. Trauma is like, it's such a big topic and very in vogue now, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
I mean, it gives me hope for humanity when like you look at the New York Times bestseller list and like The Body Keeps the Score has been on there for like years now. And it's like, oh my God, maybe like there is hope for us. But sometimes I find that some people I know can overly focus on that. This can create like perpetual asterisks um, to well-being in the present moment, and this can put you on this perpetual journey to solve this problem that you have this unconscious belief that you can't be happy or you can't be well until this problem is fixed.
Mm.
And this creates like a journey to an addiction to the journey. And Gabor Mate writes a lot about this. And Terrence McKenna wrote, he has this great quote. He's like, he was talking about mushrooms and psychedelics, but he was saying, it's like, everybody wants to sweep up Baba's ashram floor for 20 years, but given like presented with the opportunity to take like, a heroic dose of mushrooms that would solve all their problems right now, he's like, nobody would want to do that. Everybody's just in love with the journey.
Mm.
And so it's so true, and like I find myself falling for it often
Mhm.
still. And it's like a constant reminder. And there's a really incredible book I'm reading right now. And you read it, I think, The Already Free, Bruce Tipp. Yeah. And that book is just so awesome. It's just like, it really ties together meditation and, mental health and just like how it's okay to just feel everything, and how like it really builds upon that quote, that Carl Jung quote, all neurosis is like an avoidance of true suffering. That's the Carl Jung quote. This whole book is just basically unpacking that for, 300 pages or something, where it's like, no matter what it is, it's like, it's not abandonment or like unlovability or something. It's just a feeling in your belly. It's like just like a feeling, and you're just creating a label. and just feel it. Like,
Yeah.
that's it. It's so simple. I mean, it's hard. And as I say in meditation, it's so simple, but not easy. Nothing could be more simple, but it's still difficult. So the mental health thing, it's like, the doshas and all that, it's important. But I find it's not as interesting to me than the choices that we're making, because everything is downstream of that, and not only the choices like to reach for the ice cream or not reach for the ice cream, but like how we treat ourselves,
Mhm.
which is also, I hate to say it, and like even as I'm saying it, like my inner critic is like, I don't know, but like the choices that we make, like, it's also how we treat ourselves. We're actually making choices all the time.
So, I have some really good points to, yeah, just point out. So, I went to a trauma and Ayurveda conference last year in Colorado, held by Colorama, and they were talking about how prana, the same prana for prana parada,
Hmm.
it can be translated as felt sense. And so they were describing how, like, when trauma happens, you lose your sense of prana,
Hmm.
you lose your felt sense. And so prana can, again, we can think about it as wisdom, but at the same time, it's like you lose the connection with yourself and your ability to really do things that are going to fulfill yourself, because you just, that influx of trauma, which we can see as maybe like sudden prana or whatever disturbance it is, like a sudden rajas and tamas as well, right? Can really cause this disconnect. And I was in the clinic one day at school, and this lady came in, and she gave herself diabetes. Basically, she was, a few family members had died because of COVID. She was really angry. She was upset that people weren't getting vaccinated and whatnot. And the way to deal with it was to have Coke floats every night for dinner, every single night. And, so it's kind of, like what happens is like 2 weeks of that and your blood sugar is like, it's already just through the roof. But what was really striking to me was when she was asked to stop it. She's like, "Doctor, don't take away those Coke floats. It's like all that I have to keep me going." Right? And you're right in that it's like you're making choices about yourself and like how you love yourself. And when you lose that sense of prana, felt sense of like what your body needs to heal, that is
Totally.
all mental health. That is, she knows that Coke floats are not good for her.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's all, I mean, yeah, of course we can talk when it comes to like you stub your toe or like you get in a car accident or something. It's like, but it's most of it's mental health, most of it. And it's just continuously astonishing to me how it all goes back to choices and it all goes back to how we treat ourselves. And I think like in our education, it is like, especially in California, it's like those liability issues and like, it starts to get into kind of tricky territory as a practitioner when it comes to the mental health. And I think that's part of the reason why, even though our mentors and our professors are incredibly wise people, but I think maybe they don't emphasize it as much as it should be emphasized. But what you're saying with the notion of how we lose touch with our, true self with trauma, it really is like, just kind of reminds me, in the book, the already free book, and then, with the Young quote and everything, it's like with the neurosis, it kind of creates this like armoring around ourselves with trauma. Trauma kind of creates this neurosis because we don't want to re-experience that unpleasant feeling. So it's almost like this imposter self, we become like energetically or somatically this like imposter self because it's like we think it's too unpalatable or too difficult to actually, feel like that core vulnerability or feel that wound. So we have this imposter self, this trauma sheath around us, that we just kind of live with, and that's who we think we are. And so many of us just operate from that perspective. And it's just being in this physician, it's like a practitioner that gently, very gently tries to point that out. It's always interesting because people, it's like different gradations of interest of people that want to hear about it. It's like the woman you mentioned, it's like, don't take my Coke floats, away from me. And and I have so many stories about people and clients that are just, sometimes it can be something so superficial, like it's just, but then even the superficial thing, like even if it's a Coke float that's like causing your type 2 diabetes or your weight gain or something, but that's something superficial is always has like, the roots go a little deeper. That craving, back to Buddhism, it's like that first noble truth, the suffering. The second noble truth is the cause of suffering is craving, desire, tanha, thirst. So to get to that desire and that craving, it's like, lifting up under the hood of the Coke float and seeing what's going on there. That's like where I'm just super interested and fascinated. Ayurveda is like a root cause medicine. It's
Mhm.
addressing the root cause of a certain illness. And I find that like, it's like my moral obligation to sort of get in there with people because that's the root cause. The root cause is not the Coke float. The root cause is that desire, that craving, or either to fill a void or, it's like that we don't feel validated or whatever it is. It's like that's the root cause. And it's delicate territory with a lot of people,
Mhm.
but it's, I find that it's just like I wouldn't be doing like this vast, incredibly wise tradition any service if I didn't like poke the bear a little bit when it came to that. And I find it's can get a little weird with some clients, but also most people they're like, yeah, they get it. It's like something's happening in the culture. The people are starting to understand, or at least people that come to natural medicine, because a lot of people who come to natural medicine are just exhausted by like allopathy, been gaslit and or just been, yeah, that's a whole nother topic. But it's I think people who come to natural medicine are like more open than the average person.
Since you're dealing with clients, I think when we talked about, the difference between generations, right? What I've found is that millennials are actually pretty in tune with the fact that they have mental health challenges. And it's been interesting talking to people who are slightly older, and they might not perceive that they have any of these challenges. So I find with some of the, just some of the older generations that sometimes there are these things that they're unwilling to admit, or maybe it's just like they don't perceive as that them having any control over it.
Hmm.
Do you find that to be the case as well? And how do you, when you do, come across clients who are like, oh, mentally I'm all is good, and that there are certain things that are happening, how do you approach that?
I find that like everybody is like a Rubik's cube, and I find that like with Westerners, now that like I'm thinking about it, I find that I have to kind of razzle dazzle people with logic first. And so they understand that I'm not some like woo woo like hippie, but if I like the notion of the Prajna Prada and the ice cream,
Mhm.
everybody kind of gets that. They understand it. They'll nod like, uh-huh, uh-huh. But even if they don't put it into practice, they sort of get it. But like with people, especially new clients, I always like try to like appeal to their reason. Like, and one of my favorite things, and not only mental health, is like with the Ayurveda, it's like, the tongue scraping, the oil pulling, the abhyanga, and all that. When I recommend these things, when I talk about these things, I always take like this Western approach, right? So like that kind of relaxes their mind. So like with the abhyanga, for example, it's like it's just so rational and how these people 5,000 years ago figured this out. It's like, your skin is basically a vital part of your endocrine system. And
Mhm.
actually, in women, it manufactures premenopausal women, it manufactures 75% of your estrogen. In postmenopausal women, 99% of your estrogen is made in your skin. And what does your endocrine system need to produce hormones? Fat, right?
Mhm.
So when you give yourself an Abhyanga, you're actually giving your endocrine system the vital components it needs to manufacture hormones, right? And so people are like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like giving myself a massage or just putting a little bit on your thyroid in the morning or something. And
Yeah.
tongue scraping, it's like all this ama that you want to scrape out of your tongue. It actually increases the sensitivity of your taste buds. It can actually help you lose weight because your taste buds are more sensitive and you need like less. And oil pulling, the bacteria, lipid encapsulated bacteria, they bind to the lipids in the oil and you swish and you spit it out. And it's actually, Alzheimer's. It's now being identified as bacteria that migrates from your oral cavity or oral microbiome to the brain. So like when I start to like explain these like ancient Ayurvedic practices, but in like Western terminology,
Yeah.
I find that people's armoring drops. And it's sort of like they become a bit more tenderized to like introduce some a bit more esoteric, mental health concepts to them because they trust me that I'm like, that I don't just speak one language of like natural health, that I can actually communicate in the like the lingua franca of like modernity. So it's like I find that most people, if they're not super open to it in the beginning, it's like once I start to explain it in their language, then they become more trusting. And I think it's really important to, at the same time, meet people where they're at, even though sometimes it's like very uncomfortable. And, I listened, there's this one interview I listened, I can only remember who it was with. It was like some Ayurveda podcast from yesteryear and years ago. And this guy was talking about how, one of his clients kept coming back to see him and she just never did anything he recommended.
Mhm.
And then finally, he's like, okay, just wear a tight leather coat to, keep your vata warm. And she did it, that's the only thing she ever did. And after multiple visits, she just got a tight leather jacket to keep the warmth inside. And so I try to remember that.
Mhm.
And like I had a client recently who was like, he panic attacked and couldn't sleep and all this stuff. And he was a cocaine addict.
Mhm.
He did cocaine like every night. And like from my perspective, it's like, okay, well, just, as in Charaka Samhita, removing the cause of an illness is in of itself the best treatment. Right. So like in that case, it's like, okay, maybe if you stop the cocaine, you could sleep, your panic attacks would go away. But it's like he wasn't ready to do that. So do I say use cocaine in the morning instead of the evening? It's like you have to meet people where they're at.
Yeah.
And it's just astonishing. Everybody is just in different positions. But I will say it's like one thing after seeing so many clients now, it's like everybody is just kind of seeking clues to their own well-being, their own health. It's like people are just want to be free from suffering and they just want to have happiness and the causes of happiness and health. It's like that's the common thread of everybody. And there's something so beautiful and simple in that. And then you can see that in all of humanity. It's like every single person that you're stuck in traffic with, or that you're in like the waiting room with, or in line at the DMV with. It's like everybody just wants to be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. And everybody wants health and happiness and the causes of health and happiness without exception. And it's just to see these commonalities in people. And
Yeah.
I forget what the question was.
No, that's a really good answer. It's just I think meeting people where they're at, right? Like, and also like adopting it and all of that is a really key way to start the conversation. And for me, it's like I want everyone to know that they're held in a safe space and that like they can come to me with whatever, but when they're not ready to do that, like, also just having the space there is fine. It took me 1 year for one client of mine. I would meet with her every month. She did not do a single recommendation for 1 year. And then after a year, she finally took her herbs. So, um, you know, sometimes
Yeah,
it is literally just holding space. Yeah.
totally. Sometimes people just want to be heard and listened to, you know, and that's it. And sometimes people just want diet. They just want doshas, and they just want to know that kale is high in oxalates or something. It's like that's all they want. And there are people, I find they're in the minority, those people. Um, but yeah, you have to meet people where they're at the end of the day.
All right. I think that's a wonderful place to end today's conversation. I'm sure there's a lot more we could talk about, but maybe another time. And yeah,
Would
I
love
just want
to.
to really thank you for sharing your story, for bringing your perspective and I hear a lot of passion with what you're doing now. So you're just sharing a story of refining passion and all of that too. So yeah, it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Michael.
Awesome, Valley. Thanks for having me. That was super fun.
Hey there. If you've been tuning in and find yourself wondering how you can also rise from the ashes and live your best life, then I've got something special for you. This podcast, From the Ashes, is a project of Intrepid Wellness, where we are dedicated to inspiring people like you to take that next step towards a more vibrant life. I'd love to invite you to schedule a free 30-minute connection and clarity call with me. It's the perfect opportunity to say hello, share your goals for the future with someone who wants to see you thrive, and get you one step closer to living your best life. The link to book is in the show notes. Looking forward to meeting you soon.